Hello everyone, this is my presentation for our final project and the adaptation that I created. The scene that I wanted to depict was Elk Frody, Thorir, and Bodvar. Specifically, I wanted to depict these three brothers with their specific predestined weapons, and I wanted to showcase their physical characteristics, depicting the curses that two of them received. And I also wanted to show what their life became later on in the story. I chose this scene to adapt because really I just find it to be an interesting concept. I think that the idea of predestined weapons is fascinating, and I wanted to showcase these brothers, their curses, and their weapons. So the medium that I chose for this adaptation was pixel art. I chose this medium for my adaptation because originally I was considering using the medium of cross stitch. I'm familiar with that medium, and I knew that would be very difficult to try to create an adaptation on the fly, just because it takes a lot longer to change things around with that medium. So I ended up going with pixel art because it's somewhat familiar to me, and it's also has a sort of special place in my heart, in that whenever I see pixel art and whenever I think of pixel art, it reminds me of old games, which is my favorite hobby. I absolutely adore gaming. So whenever I see pixel art, I really think of the old games that I've come to be familiar with and come to love. So this is my adaptation of. On the left, you can see Elk Frody. In the middle, you can see Thorir Houndsfoot, and on the right, you can see Bodvar. Taking a closer look at Frody, we can see his curse of a man above the navel, and an elk below that. To depict an elk, I tried to go for sort of the satyr-like look that we can see in some other more modern pieces of art that I'll showcase in a little bit. He grasped the handle of the remaining weapon, a short sword, so you can see him holding this short sword here. And then finally, I wanted to showcase what he ended up doing with his life. Later on in his life, he ended up making a home high in the mountains and attacking travelers and killing them for money. So I wanted to showcase this by putting him in this sort of leather tunic that you can see up here, with this sort of black shawl to show that he's this rogue-like character that's a bit mysterious. And whenever I think of rogues, I usually think of them wearing this leather sort of armor. So, like I was talking about earlier, this is sort of what I had in mind whenever I first originally read this scene, and whenever I was creating this adaptation. If you look at Grover Underwood from the Percy Jackson film adaptation, you can see these satyr-like, elk-like legs from the waist down, and that was sort of what I was trying to pick with Frody from the waist down. Now, moving on to Thorir. This was one of the ones that I had to sort of change around a bit for the adaptation to pixel art. So you can see that he had dog's feet from his insteps down, as you see from this quote from page 40. However, so the insteps should be about right here and onwards. But I was struggling to create a good transition from human foot to hound's feet using the medium of pixel art. So what I ended up doing was creating the entire foot as a hound's foot, just for ease of the adaptation and making it more recognizable, even though it's not exactly what we see in the story itself. So I can also show this is the sort of axe that I envisioned him holding, this large axe for this large man, and I specifically made him very large. So if we look at the larger image here, you can see that he's roughly twice the width of his two brothers, both of which are larger, imposing men themselves. But I wanted to specifically make him twice their size because of the story that we see of how he becomes king. We see him sitting in this large throne, and I quote, "that is big enough for two men to sit on comfortably on, is placed in the midst of the assembly. The man who fills that seat is chosen king." So I specifically made him shirtless to show that he's this really large, very wide, very muscular man that would be large enough to fill up this throne to become king. And finally, we have Bodvar. So from the get-go, there's no blemish on him. He's just a honorable man. So I didn't have to do anything specific to show off his curses because he was unblemished. He was so after as he sort of starts his life and gets his sword and moves on from living at home, it says that he was well equipped with weapons and clothes, and that he's given this sword. So I wanted to put him in this really nice armor with this nice cloak, holding this, very large sword. I made the sword sort of comically large to really emphasize the difference between him and his brother Elk-Frody. Then I also, so if you're familiar with the story, or if you remember this part of the story, his sword is only able to be urged into action 3 times. So I specifically tried to show these 3 sections with the sheen or the glint of the blade, just because I couldn't think of any other way to show off the idea that he could only use it 3 times other than sectioning it in 3 different ways. I sort of imagine that, maybe if the first time he uses it, maybe that this part of the blade turns to the normal gray of the rest of the metal. But that was just something that I kind of thought of in my mind. So later on in life, he becomes this, famous warrior, this very strong, very noble warrior. And that is also why I wanted to put him in this regal cloak with this nice armor, to showcase his power as a warrior. Then here they are again, the 3 brothers, as they are standing side by side. And that is my adaptation of the 3 brothers. Thank you.